start quickly because we've delayed a lot of time. We'll start this debate with the Prime Minister and the person of Mr. Joseph Miracle. Here. Sure.
What the motion be?
So the motion reads, humanitarian intervention has been defined as a state's use of military force against another state, with publicly stating its goals is to end human rights violations and assistance
Sure.
The motion. This House believes that humanitarian intervention is an illegitimate use of force against a state's sovereignty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Speaker of the House, so two very important things that we need to understand before the debate proceeds. Firstly, is to also look at, should I start again? See, I don't want the motion. I don't see how again.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Are we good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. The Speaker of the House, in this motion, two very important things we need to know before we start. First one is the key actor in this debate. The actor here is one state, one unilateral state that announces it wants to intervene or invade another state in order to restore order. Recognize that this is not multilateral, this is not like UN intervention, NATO, blah blah. This is a state wanting to invade, and that's the kind of space in which we have to debate this motion. But secondly also is to understand that the publicly stated goals over there just means that the whole world or everybody knows the reason for which they are going there. That in itself, Madam Speaker, cannot mean that once they state the goals, it means those goals will be achieved, number one. Number two, it also doesn't mean that once they state those goals, magically they will have the resources to do it. At best, what the world can do is to say this intervention has failed. It won't bring them out, it won't really do anything to them. So the stated, like the publicly stated goals is just like stated for show. It really has no influence on what happens, right? But the last thing that we also need to understand is the issue of supplying aid. We say that in as much as the motion seeks to address the use of force, the supplying of aid are things that are very peripheral, and they are not the main reasons why you use force to invade a country. It's really not to supply aid, it's to really intervene and like try to stop whatever thing that's happening there. We think these are like three very important clarifications in this debate. But before I go on, Madam Speaker, 4 reasons why we would consider this illegitimate. Very just another state that just comes inside to act. It's something that breaches that territorial integrity because it's a direct affront onto their borders, and then like it's war that you're actually bringing to their borders. We think it's very illegitimate because 1, states have their own autonomy. 2, states are recognized by their citizens as the sole authority. Number 3, they have the independence to act in things that concern them. And number 4, they have the territorial sovereignty, as I've told you. In a modern world, you can't have a state without like that territory. It's a very key thing to states. When you breach that, you are breaching the state sovereignty. It's a very bad thing to have in this debate. But secondly, also, we say that, so I'm down with that principle. Second thing we say is that in the first place, human rights violations and the human rights abuses are such a very subjective thing, right? A very wide spectrum of things that happen. So it is very difficult for one state to say that they have objectively realized that these things are going on and then they want to invade. What it means is that America can say that, well, we think that 2 people are like dying because of these things, so we want to invade. It's like, it's very, very difficult for you to have those kind of metrics, right? Unlike certain situations where, like natural disaster and all those things, where we can know, yes, there's an earthquake and all those things. Human rights violations are so subjective that it's very, very difficult for you to determine the point where somebody has to intervene. That means that there's so much room for like foreign powers to abuse this power, and they can always invade states anytime that they think is the right thing to do. We think that when you want to take such a drastic measure, you always need to have an objective metric, and it's very difficult to have that here, which is why the use of force is very legitimate in that regard. But then there are also several problems of interventions, and all these things put together will show you why it's illegitimate for states to do that. First thing is that usually when you have these invasions, what happens is an asymmetric warfare, right? On two levels. First one is that the invading force would probably have so much power, like so much military might that they just come into the states and then they want to mess everything up, right? Two things that happen is, first one is the states would now have to use guerrilla warfare, like the guys being attacked would now have to use guerrilla warfare. These are the things that happened in Vietnam and Cuba and all those places, right? People go into the bushes, the whole thing becomes prolonged, 2 years, 3 years, like invading army is still there, and so many people are dying. We think that given the guerrilla warfare, that is like likely to happen because of these things. It's a bad thing for them to do. That's the first thing on the asymmetric warfare. But the second thing is that if the invading force is also not so large, which will push them to guerrilla warfare, what will happen is that it will also be very small, which means that our boundaries are breached, the sovereignty is breached. However, we don't gain anything out of it because the invading army is so small because they can't really challenge the government authorities and all this. We think there's a big problem of interventions, and it makes that use of force illegitimate because one, you push guerrilla warfare, which extends those things and there's loss of life, and secondly, you don't gain anything from that. Second thing is the role of the media in these kind of wars. What it means is that because you are not coming because of NATO or UN, but you are coming because of your own state's domestic policy, it means that you are also susceptible to what the media in your state says. If a lot more people feel that we are wasting our time in Syria or we are wasting our time in Iran, so let's pull out, it means the state is more likely to cave because the reason why they attacked wasn't because of UN, it was just because of their own reasons. It means that states that invade are much more likely to leave even before the problem is dealt with because of the high media coverage. We think that given the sacrifice and the loss of life and everything, it's a very legitimate thing for you to do when you use force to kill so many people, but then you don't stay around long enough to ensure that those things are dealt with. Very legitimate, and it also ties into the probability of success. Third thing we want to talk about is how you have so many bad effects of the intervention, how it messes up the civilian life of the people in that state, and how it messes up their lives and everything. Because already you argue that there are so many humanitarian abuses, life is so bad for them. When you invade the place, then you're making it much more worse because there was only one kind of abuse. Now there are two situations, right? More military abuse, more soldiers parading the streets, fewer people able to go to school, and much more lawlessness in the state, right? We think that these are very serious things that really spoil the sanity or the sanctity of the kind of things in the state. Then the fourth thing is how this will easily degenerate into proxy wars. What it means is that if the US decides to invade Iran or Iraq because they feel there are so many human rights violations, right? Because of those things, there's so much incentive for a country like Russia to also go there in order to counteract the kind of influence that US has over them. I think that all these things create proxy wars, which are very bad because now states have other steps to do the kind of things they want to do without really solving the problems. The Speaker of the House invading a sovereign state is illegitimate for all these reasons. That's why we don't support it. We are proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Nweku, for your Prime Minister's speech. We will now invite Mr. Prosper Michael Ametu to give us the Leader of Opposition speech. Here.
States are created for citizens and not citizens for states. This means the ideals and the existence of the state is one that should better the life of the citizen. And if it does not, if that ideal does not better the life of the citizen, we can circumvent that ideal or we can circumvent that ideology, be it sovereignty, be it democracy, whatever it might be, as long as it doesn't make the lives of the people within that state habitable, then we shouldn't buy into such an ideal or such an ideology, and we can go against it and reject it in today's debate. So hence, we can show why an ideal is illegitimate in of itself. But more importantly, I'm going to do 4 things to you in today's debate. I'm going to show you the obligation on the part of the actors in today's debate. First off, before I begin, I'd like to reject the premise that Tintin sets when he says that these actions are always unilateral. They do not necessarily have to be unilateral, they could be multilateral, it could be the whole UN invading the state. That is not really the bone of contention. The bone of contention is the invasion itself being an illegitimate act upon the sovereignty of the state. So they are meant to argue why sovereignty is so important that we should never touch it, irrespective of what goes on. And we are going to argue why that is not true and why we don't buy into that rhetoric. Secondly, I'm equally going to argue to you why it is particularly legitimate for us to circumvent state ideals, and I'll equally give you case studies in that regard, and I'll give you the metrics upon which we can argue legitimacy in that regard. But before that, some rebuttals of his case. So he comes to argue the fact that there might not be enough machinery to actively fight against whatever human rights abuses that are going on in whatever said state. And when that happens, it is wrong for us to try to correct whatever issues that go on in that state. We believe that we have no set in stone certainty as to the success that is going to happen in that state. But we believe as an international community that it's best to act to prevent whatever suffering those people in that space are going through. Because necessarily, just because you have higher military strength doesn't mean you are going to win a particular war, because you don't know the terrain upon which you are engaging. But the most important thing is to know that you have acted and giving hope to a certain group of people who are suffering from a despotic government or from a despotic state. We believe that it is very necessary in that regard. Even if we feel we've given hope to a certain amount of people and they've been able to die, happy people knowing that there is a chance that they could escape whatever suffering they are going through and whatnot. But most importantly, he argues about casualties and guerrilla warfare. We feel that casualties already exist in this world. If we do nothing and we allow things to go on as they are in status quo, people will keep dying and people will keep suffering. So those same casualties will be present in status quo. We present a world where we actively engage this evil, and let's say 50 extra people die, but then no one else dies after those 50 people. We buy into such a world because that gives us the maximum utility in that regard. But most importantly, he then again tries to argue the whole idea of proxy war, saying that if the US tries to help Iran, Russia might also come to go against Iran. We believe that attaining allies is not something that is impossible. If you get Russia to go against you, we can also get Germany to also join the forces to fight for us. That is basically how the World War happened. The Axis kept getting more and more people buying into their rhetoric. As long as people feel it's a just cause, they will always buy in and they will always want to help more. So in the long run, we can always get allies to further kill whatever oppression that is going on in that said space. But most importantly, to our case in today's debate, state ideals and when they can be circumvented. We believe that state ideals or attributes are made to protect or better the lives of citizens. Sovereignty is an ideal of the state, and as such, if it does not favor the citizen, then it can be circumvented or repealed. This means that if the sovereignty of the state is not used to better the lives of the citizen, but is used to protect a despotic government, we can ignore the sovereignty and act in the good of the people, because the idea of sovereignty is not one that's meant to cage the people under a despotic government. We feel that is something that is justified in this regard. But most importantly, the idea of territorial integrity. The reason territorial integrity and sovereignty is important is because it is innately assumed that the state machinery would best perform or would work for the good of the citizens. So because of that innate assumption that we think that the government will always go in our favor, that is why we say the government should own its own territory. But when the government doesn't go in our favor, then we should not give them that benefit to further perpetuate or use a power that is supposed to be used for good, for evil. Panel, if item A, which is meant to be used for a good, is used by an individual for a bad, it's going to be morally bankrupt for us to insist that item A should continue being in the possession of the said individual. That is what we brought it. But to our next argument in today's debate, the metrics upon which we can judge legitimacy. We feel if we want to judge the legitimacy of an action, there are two bases upon which you can judge it. First, on a consequential level, and secondly, on a categorical level. We feel categorically human rights abuses are things that the general populace and the international community frown upon. That means we don't buy into the idea of human rights abuses, irrespective of where it happens. So if we do anything to stop it, then it is something that the international community and humanity at large is going to buy into. So on a categorical level, we are the ones who are going an extra mile, or who are going in the right direction to cure an ill that the whole society frowns upon. We feel that on its own makes this action legitimate. But on the second level, on the level of consequences here, we feel that as long as there is a marginal utility we stand to gain in that regard, we should buy into the rhetoric of going into such a said action. Because when we do so, we get a said utility from it. And I've already analyzed in my subsequent matter why it's necessary for us to always prioritize the consequential benefit we get from this said action. But more importantly, this is very important, the moral burden that is on actors to always do things to door down whatever punishments or whatever suffering other people are going through. We feel that individuals have an obligation based on the capacity or the power they possess to work in favor of weaklings or people who are suffering. That means the international community on a moral Kantian basis is compulsorily supposed to help individuals who are going through ills. That's why we have AIDS in the sex system. That is why we have people sending relief programs and what's not in the sex system. Because it is their job, it is on the moral level, it is their obligation to do so. Because standing as onlookers as the international community sends a bad message. But more importantly, the reason why this is particularly important for the international community is that whatever ills come out of that space is going to be spread across the general populace. This means that everybody would eventually suffer because we have to take care of casualties and we have to take care of refugees. We don't buy such a rhetoric and we feel the world we present is very bankrupt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prosper Michael Lametu, for that speech. Order, please. Order. We'll invite the Deputy Prime Minister in the person of Mr. Ziad Ibn.
Guys, please listen. Oh, I can't. I said the thing. Okay. Panel, the entirety of opposition's case is going to be one that will be premised on a false utopian mentality. I.e., the idea that the mere fact that we are humanitarian, we are intervening in a different country, that necessarily means that human rights violations will automatically cease. That necessarily means that things will be perfect and dandy, and we are going to have a sort of American liberal style of governance all of a sudden. In today's debate, for us to properly analyze whether or not the act is legitimate, we must do a couple of things. One, we must look at the actors that are most likely going to be involved in any sort of humanitarian intervention. Simpson told you that the vast majority of instances is going to be one actor. I'm going to analyze you that even if it's several actors, why in and of itself is most likely going to be something that is unjust. But then beyond that, I'm going to give you an analysis that shows that for us to be able to sufficiently analyze whether humanitarian interventions are legitimate or not, we've had past humanitarian interventions. Let us look back at them and let us analyze whether those themselves are able to sufficiently meet the very aims to which they said they wanted to achieve or to which they wanted to intervene. If we can give you sufficient analysis to show that that is most likely not going to happen, and the resulting state, i.e. the capacity of us even having a failed state, is something that is much worse, something that is much deleterious, as compared to even us having dictators in the system, we think that that is something that is better. So I have 4 analyses in today's debate. This is very important. 1, our analysis that no state has the legitimacy to use force against another state, and I'll give you analysis. 2, I'll explain to you why in the vast majority of instances,
there are inconsistencies between publicly stated goals and what actually happens in warring states. Here, I will explain to you why it is illegitimate for criminals to use force against other criminals, and in this case, the criminals obviously being other states, or even if it's going to be a continuation of states, why there is still something that is illegitimate. And four, I'll give you a substantive analysis about the history of humanitarian intervention, because we have a lot of humanitarian intervention, and we look whether they or not they release achieve the aim to which they said they wanted to do. So listen to the analysis, please. 6 minutes, good. Okay, no state has the legitimacy to use force against another state. But this is very, very basic. We all believe in the idea that no such individual should take the law into their own hands. So even at the point at which a particular individual is going to push me or use force to get me to do something that is good, that we can all agree to be good, we all frown upon it and characterize that act of using force to push me to do something that is good as something that is illegitimate in and of itself. When it comes to states, the idea of sovereignty itself means that the only legitimate actor is the state itself, i.e. the people who are governing that state, who are governing that geography, who have been voted for, or who are in charge of running that state. We think that is the same analysis that applies to, for example, police, whereby you say it's illegitimate for example, Great Kali to use force to get me to do something, even if that thing is good. We also consider that utilization of force as something that is bad, because it is not an actor that is endowed with the capacity to act in that particular way. So do not be endowed with capacity to act. When you act, even if it achieves all the good aims which they object, to which they say is good, i.e. promotion of human rights and all of those things, it still is illegitimate because it entails one state that doesn't have that moral authority, that doesn't have that, for example, let's say God-given authority to use force against another state, and we think that that's something that is illegitimate in and of itself. Secondly, there is inconsistencies between publicly stated goals and what actually happens. But obviously, you don't expect America to say that we are going to Libya to take their oil. Or you don't expect them to say that we are going to Iran to invade them and take their resources. Obviously, they'll say we are going to Iran, we are going to Libya to promote human rights, because that is what can sell to the American public. But then, we can listen this in case you don't know. The Clinton emails categorically stated that the reason why America invaded Libya was not merely to promote human rights, it was because Libya has oil. If the US is fully committed, for example, to the promotion of human rights, if you have invaded Russia, if you have invaded China, why isn't it invaded it? Because, for example, it knows that it can't get what it was from this country. So if US was objectively an actor, for example, or even if the UN in total was an organization that is aimed at promoting human rights, one of the biggest rights violators we can talk about are China, Russia, and all of those things. But no invasion or no intervention is ever done there. Why? Because there exists an incentive to be able to plunder weaker states and take their resources, something that they cannot do with Russia and China. So it's not the case that US really cares so much about human rights. It just cares about where it can get the most resources. They should give us an analysis why US is not invading one of these countries if they are really committed to their promotion. Okay, third analysis. Why is it legitimate for criminals to police criminals? No, but in this way, no, it's not our burden to give you an alternative. The motion simply states. The motion simply states, is it legitimate or is it not illegitimate? We don't have to give you alternatives. But even beyond that, if we're going to give you alternatives, we think that other means of discourse, that's not our burden, but I'll give it to you because I can. Other means of discourse or of conflict solution is better, and I'll give you the analysis, so don't worry. So can criminals police criminals? So for example, the biggest actor in this debate most likely is going to be the US. Even if it's going to be a group of states, it's going to be a group of corrupt states. Why? Because, for example, the US itself that says it's going to Libya to promote human rights, it's itself a violator of human rights. For example, US tortures criminals in Abu Ghraib prison, it tortures criminals in Guantanamo Bay, a black IPC being shot in the US and they are being killed. If they are all going to invade, this guy say any state that abuses human rights will invade. That's not how it works. Otherwise, the US will have been invaded because itself is a violator of human rights. You don't think that the fact that people are killing each other in the US, that doesn't mean US doesn't violate rights. The police state, which is part of the state itself, violates the rights of black people by constantly shooting them, racial profiling and all of those things, and indicative of state abuse and US abuse. So, given that you yourself you are a criminal, given that you yourself you are not an objective moral actor that can apply objectively accepted moral principles, should we allow you to use force against another person? We think that if you are a criminal yourself and you are using force against another one, that itself is something that is illegitimate because you are not a good moral actor yourself, since we already gave you the analysis. But also, we have the history of invasion and history of protection to bank on and to say whether or not this is legitimate. Two cases. Let's look at Libya, let's look at Iraq. In which the US invaded because it thought it was going to promote human rights. Rwanda, what happened in Rwanda was terrible, the genocide. But Rwanda is one of the biggest growing African countries currently. While Rwanda didn't have those invasions, but Libya didn't have those invasions, Iraq didn't have that invasion. And what you have currently in these states are, for example, the rise of terrorists and insurgents. Look at what is happening in Syria. When people thought that Bashar al-Assad was automatically abusing people, not giving them democratic rights, and then they invaded Syria. Syria is most likely a failed state now. We think that comparing Syria to how it was before the invasion would want a Syria whereby some of these abuses can occur, yes, it's regrettable, but compare that to the power of Vacuum that we created, for example, when the government is removed, whereby you now have a whole lot of rebel movement, you cannot hold accountable versus one actor you can always engage and get to dialogue with and discuss. So now, there's a distinction between publicly stated goals and what actually happened. We have a history of abuses on our side, and we think that that's really less terrible. We are proud to prove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ziad Ibn Shiraz, for that speech. We will now call on the last speaker for the opening half of the debate, Mr. Isaac Dura, to give us the Deputy Leader of Opposition speech. Here.
Human dignity is the basic issue that defines our humanity. It is directly linked to the acknowledgement of our basic human rights and are largely what government and the idea of statehood are set to protect. Active trespassing the borders as a government to perpetrate these specific harms and like being used as a machinery to perpetrate these harms makes you lack the ability to be regarded for the things we enjoy as a government. Hence, we are illegitimate to use force to encroach your borders to ensure that the right thing is done. What this means basically is that as a government, you are set for the reason of the human dignity of your citizens and to protect their basic human dignity. When you become a machinery to go against that dignity you are set to protect, you are no longer a government, but you are something else that's tyrannical, and we can't acknowledge to you the benefits like sovereignty that we acknowledge to normal states, because at this point in time, you are something else of a monster that we need to eradicate. That we need to eradicate. Before I go on with the engagement, these are the arguments from side opening opposition. We say to prove legitimacy, we must prove morality. We must prove how the actor is the right one, how it is justified, and we bring further arguments on international optics and how ideal circumstances are not what this debate is speaking to, and how we win on that. But also we bring together dichotomy between government and state, and how it's very important. And how it's very important in today's debate. So, before I come on, Tintin says there are three things that this debate is supposed to touch on. Moral right to act, I would engage that with my point. Ability to act, that's capacity, I would also engage that. And also the probability of success. So their main argument that the probability of success is very low and might degenerate the situation. Like there is no chance of success. I said there is no chance of success. There is no chance of success. Hence, we shouldn't go on with such a thing. But we say that the probability of an action's failure doesn't demoralize it. Self-defense or like a good action, a moral action, even if it fails, it's still justified because you stood for the good thing. So in the bid to fight for independence, if Ghanaians have failed in in their bid to fight for independence, something they believe to be moral, to be right, it was still a legitimate act, and like that failure, we don't judge actions, like the morality of our actions, based on its failure or its success, but rather the intent of such an action and how plausible it is morally. And secondly, the circumstances these actions lead to, and I point to you how these circumstances are desirable in our model. So they say that state sovereignty and what have you, but he makes a very important statement. He says, state reserves the absolute authority given by citizens and the right to take actions within territorial borders. That's what we say in these situations of human rights abuses and infringement of human dignity. Citizens citizens ascribing to state is not there. So you can't prove that the legitimacy of this state because the citizens are being suppressed and they don't really buy into such a thing unless you are going to say that all citizens are masochists who enjoy peace. But we don't think that is what this debate is like. Citizens want to break out, but the state is being used as a machinery to oppress them. So we can't endorse the state authority as a legitimate actor because citizens don't buy into such things at that point in time. But you say there is a subjective metric of human dignity. We don't buy into that. Human dignity is very universal. The right to live, the right to personal liberty and stuff. Those things are internationally recognized, and we have objectives ways of viewing them. We don't think they are left to subjective definitions of countries. Hence, we wouldn't have any of them. So basically, their best argument, they said, categorically in books, it is plausible, it is good. So they consider categorically on morality, we win. But then their main thing is on the externalities and how it leads to, externalities and how it leads to undesirable consequences. And I'll show you how it doesn't lead to it. So first, on morality, as we said categorically, the intended outcome is beneficial. Upholding humanitarian status is something that's obligatory for all countries, and also making the lives of victims better is a moral action in of itself. But then the reason why these actors are even legitimized in the first place is because of one, interdependence, because no country is an island. So if there is a failed state in Ghana, Britain is the one who's going to suffer to take in refugees in their country. They suffer, so they have a moral right to ensure that such things don't happen in other places. And then there is reduced productivity in my country because one country is failing, because these are the countries that provide me with raw materials, they provide me with economic goods and stuff. So I need to ensure my survival so that I ensure my survival as well. We say that when failures come, there is a shared effect. So we owe a shared moral obligation to make sure we are tackling it. But we say moral culpability of surrounding countries also means that they have the moral obligation to take an action. For example, for the suffering states themselves, we are morally culpable as humans not to help our brothers when they are being that length of humanity. But also for ourselves, because of interdependence, we owe a moral obligation to go on with it here.
Okay, your entire case is premised on the fact that this will help nations that are having human rights abuses. Is Syria better now, or was it better now?
So that is the they say we can't be certain of outcomes, but they are declaring outcomes. Who knows what would have happened to Pakistan if US had not intervened? Probably the state would have diminished. Who knows what would have happened to Iraq? We are not prophets and we can't tell, but we think for the intent of